Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the latest planned blockade of UK trade to the EU as a result of the French fishing dispute that authorities climbed down from in the face of threats to trade sanctions from France, only to revert back to the original position of breaking the treaty to the detriment of French fishermen being used as Brexit pawns, really. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So to recap really quickly, for those who may be unaware, as a result of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, any EU fishermen that had fished British waters over a qualifying period of time over the previous years before we left the single market were entitled to licences to carry on doing so until at least 2026, when the whole agreement comes up for renewal again. Unless, of course, Boris Johnson does something silly and the whole thing's trashed long before then. However, the Channel Island and British authorities had set a test for proof of that previous fishing activity, such that many French fishermen who tend to be fishing in smaller boats and so on can't get those licences. Not because they can't prove that they were fishing in British waters at the time. Easy to prove that. But because their proof is not quite the right sort of document on this prescriptive list. Now, I'll come to why the authorities have done this in a moment, but to remind people that this spilled over quite badly a few weeks ago, and President Macron threatened a number of sanctions, but not the least of which was 100% physical checks on all goods coming into France from Britain. That would have caused the whole thing to come to a grinding halt, quite frankly. The 11th hour, wonder of wonders, a load of licences were suddenly granted, but not all of them. After nearly a year, I gather there are still well over 100 fishing crews affected. The government promised to look at the types of proof accepted. However, they've gone back on their word again. They're now saying that they have the right to insist on whatever form of proof they like. Now, this is a blatant lie. They don't. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement does not say that the British or Channel Island authorities can decide on what form the proof has to take. It doesn't even say that proof has to be provided at all. Any EU fishing crew that was fishing these waters in a qualifying period of time preceding that exit from the single market has the right to get a licence to carry on doing so under the same conditions. That's all the agreement says. Now, obviously, it's implied that some sort of proof is going to be required, but not that the authorities get to decide, no, we're only going to accept this, not this. Like, if the evidence provides a reasonable indication that they have been active, and there'll be plenty of documentation to do so. They'll have documentation for their catches. Of course they do. Easy to prove they've been fishing there. So why aren't the authorities accepting this proof, instead insisting on a particular form of documentation that many larger operators would have had, but that the generally smaller French outfits would tend not to? Well, because of what's happening as a result, of course. Brexit was never going to survive contact with reality. The government was going to be exposed as incompetent liars and they needed distractions to avoid people going, oh, incompetent liars, maybe we should rejoin the EU. So the charlatans who spent their careers complaining about the EU were going to need to carry on doing so. But outside the EU, people might reasonably expect that we were free of these so-called shackles. I mean, if you'd listened to these people over the past few years, you would, wouldn't you? So they needed to be able to do something to say that the EU was being unreasonable, greedy, spiteful, whatever. And coming up with a system that would disproportionately hurt French fishermen was ideal because, let's face it, the French are not at all shy in the wake of their revolutionary history of taking direct action when they have a grievance. And nobody could ever accuse the French of going in for half measures when they are aggrieved. There have already been blockades of ports. There is another one planned for this weekend. The details are apparently still under discussion today and tomorrow, with the action likely to begin by Monday, possibly sooner, if they're ready. The aim is to block the trade, and it's to target particular trade, block the trade in goods to Britain at several ports to put pressure on goods that we are already in short supply of. The idea, they say, is to not harm the single market. So they're not going to blockade goods going in the other direction. I mean, we block enough of those goods ourselves. And at this time of year, such an action, if successful, would have a significant impact, you would think. Disrupting a supply chain for a relatively short time can mean consequences lasting much longer. Consider earlier this year, the Suez Canal blocked by the Ever Given. That lasted 6 days. We're still suffering the impact of that now, half a year later. More than half a year later. When was that? I think that was like March or something. And when you consider we already cannot get goods into the country fast enough to maintain stocks, it's not just like we'll have a couple of days when we're struggling and then just ramp up trade once we've cleared the boats out of the way or whatever we do. At the end of the day, it won't be easy to do that because they're not blockading our ports, it's French ports, isn't it? But we can't get enough goods into the country already. That's without having our own checks on those goods. So any serious disruption to the supply chains will have far-reaching effects because you can't just ramp it back up once it's all clear. But the thing is, it would need to have a big impact. What I mean is that a disruption to the flow of goods will obviously be noticed by the government. They will see the damage and impact on British businesses because they'll be told this, the economy, the general population and so on. The government will know what's going on. But Boris Johnson and his government don't care about that. Consider that his government have not only taken us out of the EU in almost the hardest form of Brexit possible, which is not only damaging for our economy badly right now, but will continue to do so permanently. But they are also arranging trade deals with countries around the world, including the EU, that are way more in favour of the other side than the UK. They're selling the UK short in every single trade deal. This government have absolutely zero regard for the UK. They are not people who genuinely thought that Brexit would be good for Britain and were just wrong. They knew it would be a disaster. Boris Johnson spoke out about the damage of leaving the EU and single market, many times before the referendum. Easy to look up. David Frost gave evidence in 2015 about how much damage would be done. Liz Truss not only did the same, but campaigned to remain in the EU. These are the three people who have been deciding our post-Brexit direction. None of them believed in Brexit. They just sacrificed the good of their country for their careers. And I wonder if the French fishermen realise this. Because one thing that's guaranteed to happen is that the hard Brexit media will be loving it because they'll get to publish headlines attacking the spiteful EU and quote some Tory MPs calling for war with France, as one did again a few days ago. The soft Brexit and even anti-Brexit but pro-Tory media will maybe not take such a comical stance, but they will still present the story more in line with the way Boris Johnson would want it reported. There will be few in the mainstream media that will actually tell the truth, and I will bet you none of them will refer their viewers or readers to the relevant section of the Trading Cooperation Agreement. They won't bother quoting it, possibly because they haven't read it, but certainly because they will find nowhere where it says that either side gets to be picky about the evidence that they need to accept. It simply says, if you fished in these waters during this qualifying period, then you get to carry on, son. Nothing about needing particular proof. But my point is that the government will be told of the impact of this blockade, but won't care. The media will not report the facts of the matter, even the parts of the media who are not up for friction with the EU. So the impact would need to be big enough for the public to see with their own eyes. I'm not entirely convinced that it will be. Where we already have shortages, how would you notice? Put it another way, I talked recently about how the hard Brexit papers like the Express and the Mail seemed a bit cautious about anticipating a full-blown trade war with the EU, which now seems to have subsided. I got the impression that they were concerned it would be a bit of a Brexit consequence that would be a bit bigger than they could chew. They certainly were not reporting in a way that was going, bring it on. There was no bring it on about the trade war that very nearly happened this week. It will be interesting to see how those same papers report on this blockade when it happens. Obviously, they're already running articles, and but I want to see it's happened. If their articles continue to be full of jingoistic, counterproductive nonsense, they will presumably judge the consequences to be small enough to hide from the public. Right now, it is very difficult to tell. They are reporting on the planned event, but one article I read in the Express, for example, had a distinct lack of war with France vibe about it. Obviously, it quoted David Frost complaining about the French without actually comparing what he said with what the Trade and Cooperation Agreement that he negotiated said. But it's the Express. Of all the Tory press, this is the one that can almost always be relied upon to be the standard bearer of the Conservatives. Even when they can no longer deny the mess that Boris Johnson is causing, they still push the line, oh yeah, but you imagine what would happen if the other lot got in. So we'll wait and see what happens next, but for my money, if the action you take isn't earth-shattering enough to be noticed by the British public, when both the government and the media will hide the impact and blame any visible bits on something else, I'm not sure how successful it's actually going to be. At the end of the day, Macron's previous threat to impose full checks on incoming goods seemed to make the British authorities sit up and take notice. Maybe something on that scale will ultimately be needed. Make no mistake, having a group of French fishermen creating nice distractions in the headlines is a useful tool for Boris Johnson. Whatever happens this weekend is likely to be useful to Boris Johnson. He's not going to give up this tool unless he's forced to. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.